Hello and welcome to Bolt Action Reloading. In this week's episode, we're going to cover all the equipment and components that you'll need to start reloading for .308 Winchester. Stick around. Hello and welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be covering all of the equipment and components needed to reload for .308 Winchester. Though the spirit of this video is going to be a little bit .308 Winchester specific, this information will be a little bit generic for any particular caliber that you decide that you would like to reload for. We're going to be talking about dies, brass, and all those things, so make sure you stick around to the end of the whole video. You're going to see all the specific little details that we need to start reloading for .308 Winchester here on the channel. We're going to break it out into different sections, but our first section we're going to cover is dies. So when talking about reloading for any specific caliber, dies are always going to be one of your primary concerns. There's lots of good dies out there to be had, but depending on how much you're willing to spend and any particular features you might be looking for is basically going to be making your decisions to what brand or type that you might purchase. Just so you have a clear idea of the project that we're reloading for here, this is our Remington 700 bolt action chambered in .308 Winchester, and this is the primary topic of our video today. But like I said, a lot of this information is going to transfer. The particular die set that we've selected for our application, at least to start off with, is the Hornady die set. If you're thinking that bullet crimping is something you might want to do, you might want to just go with the Lee set because they have the factory crimp die. Not that you couldn't buy that separately. Certainly nothing wrong with a Lee die set. I don't plan on doing any crimping, and I don't plan on using the collet die either. So with the dies that I would use, I consider this to be at least a little bit of an upgrade from the Lee die. I've had better luck with some of the seating dies from Hornady. They have some bullet-specific projectiles that we may want to try and reload here on the channel, as well as one of my favorite options to be able to add to the Hornady die set, which is the micrometer seating stem. For $28, thereabouts, give or take, you can add micrometer seating adjustment to any of your Hornady dies. You don't have to buy a micrometer-specific die. It works pretty good dialing it in. Pay $28, and as long as you have a Hornady die set and your seating stem works for what you're trying to use it for, it's a great asset and is a relatively inexpensive add-on, especially if you can use it on more than one caliber. If you wanted to step up to a little bit nicer set, I think you could step up to the Forester die set. I do think it has a slightly better interior finish and possibly a little bit better concentricity, but you know, your results may vary. There's certainly nothing wrong with going with somebody like Redding. The only part of you that will be sorry about picking Redding dies is your wallet. So if that's not a consideration, nothing wrong with Redding dies, that's for sure. One other quick consideration is I have a Forester press, and so I really don't need shell holders. Don't forget about a shell holder when you're picking up your die set if you have a press that requires a shell holder. The next thing we're going to talk about is brass. When you're reloading any caliber, brass selection I do think is one of the most important things besides deciding what die set you're going to go with. I'm looking to get the most out of my rifle that I possibly can, and I'm willing to spend a little bit more money on quality components. Plus, what you see on the table here today is Lapua as well as Peterson. When you're looking for brass, Peterson is my best cost to performance ratio if they have it in your caliber. If they don't have it in your caliber, I don't think there's anything wrong with going with Lapua. If you didn't want to pick one of these two and you still wanted a higher premium product, Norma or Nosler would fill that niche for you possibly as well. Going with a lower cost brass, especially if you're going to be using it in a gas gun where it's going to get beat up a little bit more, I certainly wouldn't feel bad about going with some Lake City military brass. When it comes to .308 Winchester, there's certainly a wide spectrum of brass that's available with lots of different companies. If you have some specific brand loyalty and that's your favorite brass, by all means, nothing wrong with that. If just starting out, some of the premium brass with my bolt action rifle is certainly where I want to go. Secret option number 4, if you were going to buy some factory brass, as long as you're buying quality, I don't think there would be any shame in it. At least for the box of Gold Medal Match here, Federal brass, there was very consistent weight through the lot, at least for the box that I had. I don't think there was much more than a total of a grain of extreme spread for the case weights in the entire box. So if you want to shoot some factory ammo, get it fire formed to your rifle right out of the gate, and then use those for your loads, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But if you're looking, for good quality accuracy, make sure that you're not mixing head stamps, as it certainly would be easy to have different volumes and different cases with as many manufacturers they are. That can certainly get you into some pressure problems if you're not paying attention. One more quick side note with the Lapua brass. If you are looking at .308 Winchester brass, realize there's actually two different types. This is the large rifle primer, nothing wrong with it. The other option that they offer is a small rifle primer, Palma Pocket, I believe is what they call it. It actually has a small flash hole. ID prime is a separate step. If you're going to be dealing with that small flash hole, you're either going to need a die specific, which I believe Forrester's die right out of the gate will handle that small flash hole. At least it will in 6.5 Creedmoor. If not, you might want to look at something like this Redding small decapping die. Part number is 69100. It comes with a decapping pin that will handle the palm of brass if you need it. You just remove the decapping pin from your sizing die, and you should be able to use this to remove your primers without damaging your primer pockets or your brass. With brass out of the way, let's talk about projectiles. When it comes to .308 caliber projectiles, the good news is there's lots of options, but the bad news is there's lots of options. Sometimes it might be hard to decide which ones you want to pick. The first thing I would recommend is figuring out what application you're really looking for. If you're looking for both hunting as well as target shooting, you might have to open up the range of projectiles that you're looking at. For .308 Winchester, or whatever specific caliber you might be looking at, I wouldn't think twice about looking to see if there is a favorite ammo of anybody in that particular caliber. When it comes to .308, the Federal Gold Medal Match is certainly one of the gold standards for this. They offered actually 3 different projectiles that I believe, the 168, the 175, and the 190. And even though it's federal ammunition, those are reloaded with the Sierra projectiles, at least last I knew. That is why these 3 projectiles are on our list. Realizing that there's actually load data going all the way from 110 grain projectiles all the way to at least the heaviest on my shelf that I have load data for is the 220. For our particular application here, these 168s are a lot of people's favorites. The 175s perform very well. And I've actually done a little bit of load development already with the 175s, but we'll talk about that more towards the end of the video. When it comes more to hunting projectiles or lighter weight projectiles, we can see certainly some of the cheaper projectiles, these 110 grain VMAX. If you want to see how fast you can get it going, that might be the projectile. In case you're unaware, usually the lighter the projectile, the faster you can get the velocity. The burn rate of the powder you're using is going to affect that somewhat, but reference your load data for your expected velocities. The biggest thing I would recommend when you're picking out projectiles is pick at least 5 different projectiles, cast a wider net, pick out some medium loads with some powder that you can find, and see what your results are. You might find out that the 168 didn't shoot for you very well, but the 175 was great, and that way you don't have 500 of these 168 grains laying around that you really don't want to use or aren't giving you very good results. Try a couple out, see which ones work best for you, and if they all work great, then it's a rough problem to have, but you'll just have to decide which one you like best, and then you can kind of start looking at the ballistic coefficients versus velocity you can achieve, and maybe deciding from there. Don't get hung up on one specific projectile. Nothing wrong with picking one out and saying, this is definitely one of the ones I want to try, but don't marry yourself to a projectile until you are sure that it's going to perform the way you want it to in your particular rifle. One more thing that's very important when you're looking at projectile is talking about the twist rate. Let's bring a couple more options out on the table here. These are 240 grains that I'd mentioned before, and if you look at them real close, you're going to see a note on there that says 9 twist or faster. This is talking about the twist rate of your barrel. They want you to have a 1 in 9 twist or faster barrel. In case I failed to mention earlier, our test platform is going to have a 1 in 10 inch twist, so it's very unlikely that these are going to stabilize very well in our rifle. The same is going to go for these 230 grain A-tips. Sierra did have some 230 grain data for .308 Winchester. However, usually the longer and pointier they are, the harder they are to stabilize. And these are going to be no exception. You're going to notice right on the thing, they're going to recommend a minimum twist rate of 1 in 9, same as those 240s. When you're picking projectiles, even though these might have a spectacular ballistic coefficient, it's not going to do you any good if they don't stabilize. You're not going to be able to get accurate results. I recommend that the twist rate of your barrel is going to match up reasonably to the projectile that you choose. These are not going to be on the table pretty much for .308 Winchester unless I decide to do something silly just to prove that they don't work, which I've been known to do silly things like that. If you're looking for good results right out of the gate, make sure your twist rates are going to match up to your barrel. It's certainly important when you're picking out your projectiles. Projectiles out of the way, let's talk about powder. When it comes to powder, one of the great things about .308 is there are a lot of powders that can work with it. Keep in mind, if you're working with a gas gun, you might have to narrow the band of powders you're looking at a little bit further than you would with a bolt action. That's because the burn speed is going to affect how your action functions, and you don't want to be destroying the brass as it's being ejected from your rifle. As well as damaging your brass, you very well may be lacking accuracy with those powders. Certainly a consideration for anybody running one of the AR platforms. I hesitate to go through all of these, But when it comes to 308, Varget is certainly one of the generic powders that's been around for a long time that people have had great luck with. It's going to largely depend on what projectile weights you're looking to shoot. Load data is always going to be one of the most important things. I would certainly recommend looking at your load data to ensure you're going to have a proper burn speed powder. At least when it comes to the Hornady book, not actually one of these powders is listed for the 110s. As soon as we get up to the 125 grains, the 8208 XBR is supposed to work for those. They're saying 125 grains, somewhere around 3,100 feet per second. So certainly not too shabby for the 308 case. Depending on what's available, don't think, oh my goodness, I can't find Varget on the shelf. I can't reload anything. It's certainly not the case. There's lots of good options on here. When it comes to a lot of the heavier projectiles, it seems like CFA 223 is pretty much going to be your speed demon. A lot of people have good results with it. Another popular powder might be like something like Reloader 17 or Alliance AR Comp. I don't have any AR Comp. I need to pick up some of that next time I can find it. But I know a lot of people in 308 have had good luck with AR Comp. To my understanding, Reloader 15 is no slouch in this cartridge either. And so I've got lots of options here on the shelf, but don't think you've got to have 9 different pounds of powder to try. Pick 1 or 2 of these, depending on the burn speed and what velocity you're hoping to get out of it. If you have lots of options, I wouldn't hesitate to pick something that's one of the Extreme Series powders, or it's going to be advertising temperature stability. A lot of times that temperature stability is going to help keep your extreme spreads low. If you're developing your load in warmer weather but need it to work in cold weather, you're going to have a better chance of getting the similar performance with a temperature stabilized powder. Lots of versatility in 308, should be lots of options that are going to get you down range. One thing I did want to cover before we move on, when you're looking at your load data and the powders that they list, make sure you're paying attention to the barrel length versus the velocity that the book is telling you. At least for Hornady book, the 308 Winchester data is based on a 24-inch barrel. Our particular platform is a 20-inch barrel, and so we're not going to be able to hit the velocities more than likely that Hornady has listed. Don't just keep pushing those loads because you haven't hit that velocity if you don't have the right barrel length. Powders out of the way, let's talk about primers. No, you don't need this many primers to decide on what particular option you want to pick. I put all these out here just to illustrate lots of good options. Specifically, what you're going to want to concentrate on is going to depend on what brass you decided to pick. If you end up going with a Lapua Palma primer brass, that means you're going to put you into a small rifle primer. So if your application called for small rifle primers and you were reloading for a free-floating pin, you might want to pick a harder cup, something like the CCI 41. However, if CCI aren't available, realize that there are other primer brands like Federal here. You can see the AR small rifle match primers. So you're going to be able to get the 205 MAR for that same application. Those are going to kind of fill each other's shoes if one's not available in the other. Largely, you're going to probably be able to get away with a regular small rifle primer. Again, if you're going to be using the Palma brass, certainly with a bolt action, you wouldn't have to worry about it. Any small rifle primer is going to work for you. Just a small consideration, like I said, if you have a free floating pin and that's something you're concerned with. In our particular case, I didn't get any small rifle primer brass, so we're going to be sticking more with the large rifle primers. So in Federal, we've got the regular 210, gold medal match 210. But I guess the basic things you're going to want to cover when it comes to primers, obviously small or large rifle, depending on your application. Don't think for primers you have to marry yourself to one specific brand, though you may find one brand works better than others for you. So whatever's available to you, probably not a big deal. Just make sure it's going to match up. So let's talk about some more random reloading tools that we're going to need to complete our capability to reload 308. The whole theme of this video was based on you've already got your reloading equipment, so we're not going to cover press and lube, but what we are going to cover is cartridge specific. So I mentioned a little bit earlier having a proper shell holder and how it wasn't really necessary for our Forester press, but I anneal basically every round. For my annealer, I need to be able to have a shell holder, so I have my number 2 shell holder that I use for 6.5 Creedmoor already since they share the same case head. But like I said, you're going to need to make sure along with your dies you have the right shell holder for your cartridge. Stuck on annealing for 2 seconds, you can see I also have the correct insert. This is the number 11 insert for my amp annealer. I'm not going to tell you have to have an annealer to be able to reload. I like to do it, but don't think it's a requirement. Don't let it stop you from reloading. But I made the investment in my annealer, and so adding a $20 insert to be able to make sure I can anneal for the cartridge is certainly something I'm going to do. Depending on who you guys are trimming brass, this obviously is not for 308. This is for 30-06. A case length gauge and shell holder for 308 is certainly attainable. For not a whole lot of money, you can get the adapter. and there's actually a power bit. You can put that into a drill, assuming you have one. It does a pretty good job of consistently trimming your brass. If you have a manual trimmer, you can use one of those too. I know after manually turning that for a period of time, you just get tired of it. If you had a Frankfurt Arsenal case prep station, certainly wouldn't be a bad way of going. My favorite is my Gerard trimmer. And so I picked up an insert, actually secondhand in this particular case. It trims, chamfers, and deburrs all at the same operation. It works really good, and it's really fast. So it takes one of my least favorite steps of brass prep and speeds it up immensely. Another bonus item that we'll talk about real quick, I use Sinclair expander mandrels. This is the carbide turning mandrel for 30 caliber. This is not the only 30 cal cartridge that I reload for, so I already had this item. I've had better luck getting great concentricity out of my setup by removing my expanding device from my die and actually resizing the case with the die and then pushing this expander ball through the top to open the case mouth back up. It gives me very consistent neck tension. I really do feel it gives me better concentricity on my reloads, but teaching to his own, you can certainly use the expanding device that comes with your die. And one of my first steps on trying to zero in a load is making sure I know the distance to the lands of the projectiles that I intend to reload. I've already have the bullet comparator and headspace gauge from Hornady. Picking up a modified case in .308 Winchester was certainly one of the things that I wanted to do to make sure that I could get my distance to the lands for all the projectiles I intended to reload for. This is the overall length gauge adapter. I've got an entire video on this. I'll link it in the description box below if you're interested. But using these two things together, you can pretty accurately determine where your lands are and certainly get a good idea of where to start. I like to start about 20 thousandths off the lands if possible. At least that seems to be a good place to start. So as you can see, there's a few details to getting all our reloading stuff in place. I'll put a card up in the video so you can check out the playlist I have, depending on when you find this video, of all the 308 testing I've done if you're interested in seeing how some of these different projectiles have performed and some of the methods that I've used to tune these for my rifle. Probably somewhere shortly down the line, we're going to make a video where we actually go through and use all of these tools. If you have any questions about today's video, make sure you put those in the comment section below. YouTube thinks that these are going to be some videos and playlists that you might want to check out. Check those out. If you like the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you like the content. I hope to see you come back next week. And until then, stay safe in small groups.